Imagine you're 7 years old. Your world isn't a classroom or a playground. Your world is the deafening roar of machinery, the air thick with cotton dust that chokes your lungs, and the constant, gnawing fear of the overseer's strap. Your hands, small and nimble, are your most valuable asset, perfect for darting under the giant, clattering looms to snatch up fallen scraps. But they're also raw, bleeding, and perpetually sore. You work 16 hours a day. You don't know how to read. You don't know what it feels like to just play. This wasn't a dystopian novel. For millions of children during the Industrial Revolution, this was just called Tuesday. And the most terrifying part, for millions of children today, it still is. This is the brutal, hidden world of child labor in factories, a story of stolen childhoods that stretches from the smokestacks of the 19th century to the supply chains of your favorite brands. How did we get here, and why have we never truly left? The story begins with a revolution, not of swords and shields, but of steam and steel, the Industrial Revolution. In the late 18th and 19th centuries, Britain and then the world was transformed. Hand production gave way to machines, and idyllic country life was replaced by sprawling, overcrowded cities. Families poured in from the countryside, chasing the promise of work in the new factories and mills. But what they found was not a dream. It was a desperate struggle for survival. In this new urban jungle, every family member, no matter how small, was a potential earner. And factory owners, driven by an insatiable hunger for profit, saw an opportunity. They saw children. Children were the perfect workforce. They were cheap, sometimes paid a mere fraction of an adult's wage if they were paid at all. They were docile and unlikely to organize or strike, and their small size was seen as a physical advantage. Their tiny fingers could piece together broken threads on a textile machine, a job for a piecer. Their small bodies could scramble under dangerous, fast-moving equipment to clean up cotton waste, the role of a scavenger. They could crawl through the narrowest, most claustrophobic tunnels in coal mines, working as trappers, sitting in pitch darkness for 12 hours a day just to open and close a ventilation door. Think about that. A child alone in the dark, their entire world reduced to a single wooden door and the sound of approaching coal carts. In match factories, children called dippers handled white phosphorus, a chemical so toxic it would rot their jawbones, a condition gruesomely known as phossy jaw. In glassworks, they ran molten glass to cooling racks, exposed to intense heat that seared their skin and damaged their eyes. The environment itself was a weapon. The air in cotton mills was kept deliberately hot and humid to prevent threads from snapping. It was also filled with fibrous dust that settled in workers' lungs, leading to byssinosis, or brown lung disease, a debilitating and often fatal respiratory illness. The noise was a constant, deafening thunder, a mechanical beast that never slept. Many children suffered permanent hearing loss before they even reached adulthood. There were no safety guards on the machines. A moment of exhaustion, a simple mistake, could mean a lost finger, a crushed hand, or worse. Children were scalped when their hair got caught in belts. Their limbs were torn off by unguarded gears, and some were crushed to death falling into machines they were forced to clean while they were still running. This wasn't just work. It was a daily gamble with life and limb. The days were inhumanly long. A typical shift was 12 to 16 hours, 6 days a week. For this, a child might earn a few pennies. Often, their wages were paid directly to their parents, who were trapped in a cycle of poverty that demanded the sacrifice of their own children's well-being. Malnutrition was rampant. A breakfast of watery porridge, a lump of oatcake for lunch, and then back to the grueling work. The physical toll was devastating and permanent. Children who spent their days standing at machines developed swollen joints, varicose veins, and permanently curved spines. Those who worked as scavengers, constantly stooped over, suffered from stunted growth and lifelong deformities. Their bodies were twisted and broken by the labor they were forced to endure. But the physical scars were only part of the story. The psychological damage was just as profound. Discipline in the factories was maintained through cruelty and fear. Children were beaten for being slow. They were fined for talking or looking out a window. To keep them awake during the grueling final hours of their shifts, overseers would dunk their heads in cisterns of cold water, a practice known as watering. Imagine the terror, the exhaustion, the utter hopelessness. These children were robbed of everything that defines childhood. There was no school, no time for play, no opportunity to learn or grow outside the factory walls. They were old before they were young, their futures erased by the relentless demands of the machine. One young boy, a former worker named William Dodd, wrote about his experience, describing how his body became so deformed from the work that he endured dozens of painful surgeries just to be able to walk properly as an adult. He was one of the lucky ones. He survived to tell his story. Many did not. Their short, brutal lives were consumed by the factory, their names and stories lost to history, becoming just another anonymous cog in the great, grinding engine of industrial progress. For a long time, society looked the other way. The prevailing ideology of laissez-faire capitalism meant the government shouldn't interfere with business. Factory owners argued that they were providing jobs, saving families from starvation. They even claimed that the work was good for the children, teaching them discipline. Some even made the twisted argument that they were rescuing these children from the idleness and vice of the streets. But slowly, a conscience began to stir in the nation. The horrors of the factory floor could not stay hidden forever. A movement for reform began to grow, led by a few brave and compassionate individuals who dared to challenge the status quo. People like Lord Shaftesbury, an aristocrat who dedicated his life to fighting for the rights of working children, and Richard Osler, who compared the conditions in the factories to slavery. One of the most powerful catalysts for change was the Sadler Report of 1832. Michael Sadler, a member of Parliament, led a committee to investigate conditions in textile factories. They interviewed over 80 former and current child workers, and their testimonies, published for all to read, shocked the nation to its core. For the first time, the public heard directly from the children themselves. They heard 23-year-old Elizabeth Bentley describe how she started working at age 6 and how the overseers would strap them to keep them working. She told the committee, "They are in haste to get the work done, and if we are not quick enough, they show us what they mean." She described being so tired she would hide in the wool, hoping not to be found, just to steal a moment of rest. Another witness, a young boy, was asked if he ever felt tired. His response was heartbreakingly simple. "Yes, I have been so tired that I wished I was dead." These weren't abstract economic arguments. They were raw, human stories of suffering. The public outcry was immense. It became impossible to ignore the brutal reality. In response, Parliament began to pass a series of laws known as the Factory Acts. The progress was slow and fiercely resisted by factory owners who predicted economic ruin. The first acts were weak and poorly enforced, but they were a start. The Factory Act of 1833 was a landmark piece of legislation. It banned children under 9 from working in textile mills. It limited the workday for children aged 9 to 13 to just 8 hours, and for those aged 14 to 18 to 12 hours. Crucially, it also established a system of professional factory inspectors to enforce the law. This was a radical idea at the time, that the state had a right and a duty to step inside the factory gates and protect its most vulnerable citizens. More laws followed. The Mines and Collieries Act of 1842 banned all women, girls, and boys under the age of 10 from working underground. This was a direct response to horrifying reports of children working in the dark, dangerous mine shafts, often harnessed like animals to pull carts of coal. The Factory Act of 1844 further reduced working hours for children and introduced more safety measures, such as the fencing of dangerous machinery. Slowly, painstakingly, the world of child labor in Britain was being dismantled. The fight for compulsory education went hand in hand with labor reform. As laws limited the hours children could work, the push to get them into schools grew stronger. A childhood, it was argued, should be for learning and playing, not for laboring. It took decades, but the battle was eventually won in the developed world. The sight of a 7-year-old working in a British factory became a relic of a darker time. But the story doesn't end there. It didn't disappear. It just moved. The engine of global industry, still hungry for cheap, exploitable labor, simply found new hunting grounds. Today, the brutal world of child labor is not a history lesson. It is a current event. According to the International Labor Organization, an estimated 160 million children are engaged in child labor worldwide. That's almost 1 in 10 children on the planet. Of those, nearly 80 million are trapped in hazardous work that directly endangers their health, safety, and moral development. The smokestacks may look different, the products may have changed, but the exploitation is hauntingly familiar. Instead of the textile mills of Manchester, we now have the garment factories of Bangladesh and Cambodia. These are the sweatshops of the fast fashion industry, where children, mostly girls, work long hours for pennies, stitching the cheap clothes that end up in our stores. They work with toxic dyes and chemicals without protection. They suffer verbal and physical abuse. They are the invisible hands behind that $5 t-shirt. Instead of the coal mines of Wales, we have the cobalt mines of the Democratic Republic of Congo. Here, children as young as 6 crawl through narrow, unstable tunnels, digging for the cobalt that powers the lithium-ion batteries in our smartphones, our laptops, and our electric cars. The tunnels frequently collapse, burying children alive. They breathe in toxic cobalt dust, leading to fatal lung diseases. They earn maybe $1 or $2 a day for this deadly work, feeding a multi-billion-dollar global industry. In agriculture, children harvest the cocoa for our chocolate, the tobacco for our cigarettes, and the palm oil in our food and cosmetics. They are exposed to dangerous pesticides, work with sharp tools like machetes, and carry heavy loads that damage their developing bodies. In South Asia, millions of children work in brick kilns, trapped in a form of bonded labor where their families are forced to work to pay off a debt. They breathe in clay and coal dust, suffer from heat exhaustion, and carry impossible loads of bricks, their childhoods baked away in the heat of the furnace. The modern factory, the modern sweatshop, mirrors the past in so many ways. The hours are still crushingly long. The pay is still criminally low. The conditions are still dangerously unsafe. And the justifications are eerily the same. Companies at the top of the supply chain claim ignorance. Subcontractors blame poverty and insist they are providing opportunities. Governments in many developing nations have laws against child labor, but they lack the resources or the political will to enforce them. The global supply chain has become a master of disguise. A single product can pass through dozens of different suppliers, subcontractors, and middlemen across multiple countries. This deliberate complexity makes it nearly impossible to trace the origin of every component, allowing companies to plead ignorance and avoid accountability. They can claim their corporate code of conduct forbids child labor, while knowing that somewhere down the line, a child's hands are part of their production process. So why, in the 21st century, does this brutality persist? The reasons are complex, but they almost always boil down to a few key factors. The single biggest driver is extreme poverty. When a family is struggling to afford a single meal a day, the small income a child can bring in feels like a necessity for survival, not a choice. The decision to send a child to work is rarely made out of cruelty. It is made out of desperation. A lack of access to quality education is another critical factor. In many parts of the world, schools are unavailable, unaffordable, or so poor in quality that parents see little benefit in sending their children. When school is not a viable option, work becomes the default. The cycle is vicious. A child who doesn't go to school is likely to become an unskilled adult trapped in poverty, who will then be more likely to send their own children to work. Weak laws and corruption play a huge role. Many countries have excellent laws on the books, but they are meaningless without enforcement. Factory inspectors can be bribed, and powerful corporations can operate with impunity. Finally, we have to look at our own role. Global consumer demand for ever cheaper products fuels the race to the bottom. We want fast fashion, cheap electronics, and inexpensive food. This pressure for low prices forces manufacturers to cut costs in any way they can, and the easiest cost to cut is always labor. The demand for a $10 pair of jeans in a Western shopping mall can create the conditions for a 12-year-old girl to be working a 14-hour day in a factory thousands of miles away. It is an uncomfortable truth. The conveniences and comforts of our modern lives are too often subsidized by the stolen childhoods of others. The fight is not over. Just like the reformers of the 19th century, there are incredible people and organizations today working on the front lines. They are rescuing children from factories, providing them with education and healthcare, and helping their families find sustainable sources of income. They are advocating for stronger laws, transparent supply chains, and corporate accountability. So what can we do? It can feel overwhelming, but we are not powerless. First, we must educate ourselves, understand the issue, learn which industries are most at risk for child labor. The more we know, the better choices we can make. Second, we must become conscious consumers. This doesn't mean you have to be perfect, but you can be more mindful. Support companies that are transparent about their supply chains and are committed to ethical production. Look for fair trade certifications. Ask questions. Use your voice and your wallet to tell brands that you care about who makes your products. Demand that companies take responsibility not just for their direct employees, but for every single link in their supply chain. Third, support the organizations that are doing the work on the ground. A small donation can help provide a child with school supplies, a uniform, or a hot meal. Simple things that can make the difference between a life of labor and a life of learning. The story of child labor is a dark chapter in human history, but the final pages have not yet been written. The 7-year-old from the beginning of our story, whether they are standing in a Victorian mill or a modern sweatshop, deserves a childhood. They deserve a chance to learn, to play, and to dream. The world has made progress, but the fight for that right, for every child, everywhere, is far from over. It is a fight that belongs to all of us, and it is a fight we cannot afford to lose.